Where did it all go wrong for England, do you think?
There's a few entry points here, aren't there? We often kind of have a situation where a team's preparation, and it can be as trivial as something like a load of drop passes going down in the warm-up or whatever, and then that never seems to have there never seems to be a connection maybe between that and the performance. But it was a weird fortnight lead up to this game, wasn't it? With Marcus Smith going back to Harlequins, and then it becoming with Gav Mayers breaking the story that he was going to start in the game. Always felt like an odd decision that jarred with what had gone before, as far as other coaches. When you get released to your club, we were kind of conditioned to think that was going to be it for Marcus Smith's chances for, if not playing, then certainly starting. But that came to pass. That was kind of becoming more and more clear towards the end of last week. Then he did. So you had that build-up going into it. We've subsequently learned, I think it's been reported by the BBC, that Courtney Laws was potentially going to start as well. He was ruled out with a shoulder injury on the Tuesday, I think. So a little bit of disruption by England, but you still thought, they're getting better. They're getting better. The hallmark of a Steve Borthwick side is that they'll be tough. They'll be deliberate. From the very first ruck of the game, do you remember what happened? There was a France turnover. There were 6 England players on the floor, including Jack Van Poortvliet, trapped into the ruck by one of his own players, including Carl Sinclair, who's taken out by Paul Willems, who tackled Freddie Stewart. And France should have scored within 40 seconds. Cyril Baille, who's normally a fantastic decision maker on the ball, didn't make use of a big overlap outside of him. But it took 2 minutes, and they scored from another counter attack because there was a poor kick in there from Van Poortvliet, and just every aspect of the game that had seemed so solid and had seemed like it was progressing against Wales, albeit slowly, fell apart in a really alarming way. And Owen Farrell made the point afterwards, didn't he, Ben? You were in the huddle with him, that you can't really question the intent of players, and I agree with that to a certain point. But England looked meek, and that's what will hurt Steve Borthwick the most, because he's renowned for his detail. He's renowned for kind of planning up to these fixtures and making sure that a lot of these strategies are in place. It was hard afterwards when England was saying our plan didn't work. It was tempting to say, sort of, can you please just expand a little bit on what we were trying to do, because that wasn't really clear. There were a few quick line-outs which suggested that they wanted to run France off their feet. But by the end of the game, by the end of the first half, and then by the end of the game, they looked gassed twice.
They also mauled more. They also mauled more than they had done in the first 3 or 4 games, I think, which also seems surprising, considering they'd spoken in the week about how big this French pack was, how muscular and aggressive and abrasive this French pack was. And I know the thinking might have been to sort of tie them in, but I don't understand why they didn't revert to what they were doing against Scotland and a bit more against Italy, whereby they were dummy mauling at these lineouts to hold that back in and then playing quickly. I don't know. It just seemed it did seem a little bit muddled. Having said that, just obviously I watched it on the television because I was in Edinburgh, but I think the context is surely that is one of, if not the greatest French performance of all time. I mean, to away from home, to go and completely annihilate really one of their biggest rivals, who hadn't been playing too badly up to that game, was quite phenomenal. And being kind, I think you have to put this down to an off day for England, and that it's not part of a deeper malaise. This is not a pattern. We didn't sit here last week and say that it had been building to this and that we all saw this coming. This came out of the blue, if you will.
Oh, I like that a lot. I just on the, it feels a bit weird to sort of focus so much on one ruck in particular, but it did. The first ruck did sort of highlight so many issues with the game, because JVP sort of just gets sucked into that ruck. He sort of trips over Valencia, and then I think he's got a Toja and a couple of other forwards sort of sucking him in, and then Fiku makes the easy steal. But it just felt like England felt, in their deliberate attempt to be as physical as possible and to try and match France, they were just really ragged. Like, you had Lewis Ludlam conceding a couple of breakdown penalties in the first 40 minutes for going off his feet and for coming in at the side. You could tell that they'd been revved up by whoever in the dressing room, Ellis Genge, Richard Cockrell, whoever it was, to go out there and show France what they were about. And actually, it was sort of misplaced aggression. They couldn't get the power that they needed at the breakdown in the contact area, and actually they were just too ragged. Whereas on the other side, you had Gregory Aldrit absolutely steamrolling Freddie Stewart with that one carry, and that sort of set the tone actually for what was to come.
Yeah, there was just a focus to how ferocious France were. It was really impressive. One thing I failed to mention earlier was that I don't think I'd really grasped how much this meant to France. I know they sort of, as we'd highlighted, they'd been not drifting a little bit because they were still winning in the autumn, but their performances had probably dipped a bit, it was fair to say, and then Ireland were fantastic against them, weren't they? Francois Crowe said afterwards that that the side had been stung by that criticism after the Ireland game. And another thing is the history. Charles, you did a piece on how it was the last time that they'd won at Twickenham against England was in 2005, and that Crowe said that that history was a real inspiration for them, and you could tell that there was a real focus to them. And just to make this point more widely, and we seem to have made it kind of every time on during the Six Nations, but this Six Nations has, again, to reiterate, felt like a Six Nations of two divisions where you've got teams that have moved throughout this World Cup cycle, and this was a point that Steve Borthwick made afterwards. And this was really where you saw how much momentum and how much cohesion France have built up since 2019, and how far England have got to make that up. And I don't think they're 40. This is one of the stupid things like that, adding 2 wickets on when you're playing cricket or whatever. But I don't think they're 43 points worse than France. I think if they play that fixture again, they get far closer. However, I think things can unravel when you haven't got that confidence and you haven't got that cohesion, and England are reaching for that.
A couple of points just on that. The best stat that I can give you about 2005 is that when France won that game in 2005 in the 05 Six Nations, Ollie Chesham was 4 years old. And he started, of course, on Saturday in the second round.
Started
every game. No. Yeah, in the under-5 Six Nations. Just on a more sort of serious note, 2019, obviously Fabien Galtier in that World Cup, Fabien Galtier was not the head coach of France, but he shadowed the team. He shadowed the team at the tournament. And now look where that sort of groundwork has got them. So this has been a long time coming. This has been a long time building. And, you know, what might have been for England and the RFU, because six months ago, you would have said that the plan all along was for Steve Borthwick to potentially shadow Eddie Jones at the 2023 World Cup and then go on to build for 2025. And now it just looks like a complete mess in comparison to what's happened over on the other side of the channel. They've shown us up, really, France. They've always been the sort of incompetent ones with the style, but potentially not the organisation and the logistics. And now they've got the style, the organisation, and the logistics. And England are playing second fiddle in all stakes, really.
I'd agree with that. But it takes lots to deliver on all of those things, doesn't it, Charles? And the performance, as you've rightly highlighted, was special. You know, even with that in mind,
it was sort of special, but no fluke. Like, as in, I think we were sort of waiting for France after. Charles, I don't know if you've said this already. I think we were sort of waiting for them after a bit of a slump in the autumn, and not an amazing string of performances so far in this Six Nations to blow the doors off a game, and that's exactly what they did. I think with England, there was so much talk about Smith and Farrell last week that actually it became kind of irrelevant. In fact, it became completely irrelevant because
absolutely
England had no platform for Smith to work, and actually, not that Smith can't play in the rain, of course he can, but the weather at Twickenham was so bad that you sort of thought actually this whole idea that you want to play at pace, and they spoke about that so much on Thursday at Pennyhill Park before when the team was announced, and how tempo was going to be key, ruck speed was going to be key. Borthwick was saying we haven't hit our 80-minute target for ruck speed yet at all in this tournament, and sort of hinting like this has to happen today. Well, I mean, it didn't. I think because of that, the Smith selection turned out to be not even a disaster. It was just kind of it was barely a footnote in the whole story of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I find the criticism of the English halfbacks, slightly misplaced. Really, in fact, not slightly misplaced, completely misplaced. To play at pace, it's not about just picking and selecting quick players. The pack were dismantled in all areas. There was one good scrum in the second half where France had just switched their tight heads that was in terms of plus points for the English pack, aside from a fairly decent individual performance from Maro Itoje, that was it, really. And how could you possibly be expected as a scrum half and as a fly half to conjure anything when the 8 blokes in front of you are being dismantled to such a violent degree that the English forwards were on Saturday? It's slightly short memories with regard to Jack Van Portfleet as well, because when he made his debut in Australia and when he was coming off the bench in that Test series, he brought pace, he brought zip off the bench, and he looked excellent. Now, I don't know if that's just a general theme about scrum halves coming off the bench, because I agree that Alex Mitchell has brought some of that as well. But is that just a thing of scrum halves coming off the bench and looking to increase the tempo and it being more of a sort of, I don't know, a conscious, active thing that they're trying to do? Whereas from the start of the game, maybe there isn't that conscious, active decision making in the brain of the scrum half. I'm not sure, but as I say, I think that certainly Alex Mitchell has brought tempo, but so did Jack Van Portfleet off the bench in Australia.
Yeah, that's always so difficult to gauge, isn't it? I remember Dan Robson coming on and making similar kind of similarly changing the tempo during kind of his time with England under Jones. Yeah, I totally agree on 2 points there. The one that Itoje was among the kind of more defiant figures. He won a few. I think he won at least 3 turnovers over the course of the game. I've seen his performance criticised. I thought he and Freddie Stewart were 2 of the very few to kind of emerge with their reputations from it. One point I will make, I think we're going to just go to Owen Farrell's quotes after this, but I thought in his introduction immediately brought a little bit of clarity, so he could talk about the 10 debate not being irrelevant, and it was, given how inferior England's forwards were, but Farrell's organisation definitely made a difference. So whether that is Marcus Smith not being as assertive, whether that's Henry Slade not being as assertive, I think that's a question that will have to be looked into too.